E aki ronga tira, tēnā rā koutou, tēnā koe hana, ngā mihi nui ki a koe. As Virginia Woolf, the great Bloomsbury novelist, once remarked, for most of history, Anonymous was a woman. And in her book, A Room of One's Own, drafted for a lecture at Cambridge, Woolf satirised the attitudes that until 1948 ensured that women could not graduate from that great university. To write or read or think or inquire would cloud our beauty or exhaust our time and interrupt the conquest of our prime. And as a Nuffield Fellow at Cambridge, King's College, 1988-81, which had just gone co-ed, I learned what Virginia Woolf was talking about. At King's High Table, I was often mistaken for a wife that had got lost. But fortunately by then I had spent a lot of time on Marae, and so I was quite not particularly shocked by these ritual performances. But it was with anthropological glee that I watched as during that year St John's College went through an anguished debate about whether or not to admit women as fellows or as students. Flying fellows back from leave and raising them up from their deathbeds to try and stop this abomination. And the history of the college records the Secretary of the Council, normally one of the more accurate members of the fellowship, attempted to count the, in some cases, palsied hands of the 87 standing or almost standing fellows present and delivered the result to the master. Carried, the master declared, by 57 to 28, and therefore by the necessary 2/3 majority, but only just. Still, this was enough to carry the motion, and there was much loud guffawing in the King's Common Room at the discomfiture of the old guard at St John's. And the funny thing about this is that a century earlier, almost precisely, similar scenes have been enacted in the Legislative Council in New Zealand in 1893. Soon after Kate Shepherd and others rolled their 270-metre women's suffrage petition across the floor of the House. It was a bill that gave women the vote. It was passed by a large majority, and with a roar of approval, Māori women were included in the measure. Stung by this challenge, though, the Premier, Richard Seddon, lobbied the Brewing Party and almost mustered the numbers to stop the bill in its tracks. Infuriated by his tactics, though, two members who had originally opposed the bill voted for it, and it was passed by 2 votes, by a whisker, and I mean that literally. New Zealand became the first women in the world, the first country in the world to give the vote to women. It was that narrow, it was that almost accidental. And Anonymous maybe is still perhaps a Māori woman. In a much less well-known campaign in that same year, Mary Mangakahia was fighting for women's rights in the Māori Parliament. She gave an impassioned speech in May 1893 and declared to the Paremata, "I want to explain the reason that I really want Māori women to have the vote and for women members to stand in the Māori Parliament. 1, there are many women in New Zealand whose husbands have died and who own land. 2, there are many intelligent women in New Zealand whose parents have grown old and have married men who do not know how to run their land. 3, there are very many male chiefs on this island who have appealed to the Queen over the problems affecting them, and we have never received any advantage from their appeals. For that reason, I ask this House that women members be appointed, for perhaps the Queen will consent to the appeal of her Māori female advisors, since she also is a woman." So why did Mere Mangakahia have to stand and fight in 1893 for women's rights in the Māori Parliament? Because just as rights can be fought for and won, they can also be lost. As Hannah was arguing, and this is absolutely the case, in ancestral times, Māori men and women played complementary roles based on reciprocal exchanges. If you go back into the ancient manuscripts, for example, the Te Arawa scribe, Te Rangi Kāheke, explained how, right at the beginning of the cosmos, sky and earth were a single being. Ko tahi anō te tupuna o tiwi Māori, ko rangi rawa ko papa. Earth and sky, a single being, undivided, until they were separated by their children. And as they were thrust apart, Rangi wept for Papa, and his tears fell down onto the land and became the first lakes and rivers, the tears of Rangi. And at the same time, Papa's mist rose up to greet him. And this principle of reciprocal exchange is also mirrored in the landscape, so that the west coast is Te Taitamatane, the male coast where storms crash in from the Tasman. And Te Taitamawahine is the east coast, which is gentler and easier for sea travel. And in the human body, according to the early authorities, both men and women have male and female sides of the body. And in tribal histories across the country, no tribe excluded, you will find the stories of great female leaders. Goddesses. The tikanga of gender balance in Māori are complex, multiple, and many. So at the time, though, when Mere Mangakahia made her plea in 1893, the Māori population was in free fall, with very low fertility and high mortality rates. And many of the freedoms of Māori women had been stripped away by the process of colonisation. While Māori women retained their land rights even when the Māori Land Court was set up, until 1888, if they married under European law, they lost their lands to their husbands. When the Māori Parliament was set up in 1892, women leaders could speak but not vote, although in the European Parliament they had no speaking or voting rights at all. And I think it's really important to understand how these losses happened for Māori women and why European women were in the situation they were in 1893. Because they trace back to really ancient mythologies, and these are mythic stories. Let me emphasise that. From medieval times until now, actually, in many ways, the great chain of being modelled a hierarchical cosmos with God at the top, a divine monarch, down through the ranks of the aristocracy and the commoners, with men over women and children, and then so-called civilised people over barbarians, barbarians over savages, savages over animals, plants, and right down to rocks. And this was echoed for women in the legal doctrine of coverture, in which women were literally covered by their husbands and fathers, with no independent rights or legal identity. They're expected to know their places and couldn't hold property, vote, or play many leadership roles. A tiered universe is so deeply embedded in Western social arrangements that it's extremely resilient, incredibly difficult to get rid of and to contest. Once shattered, glass ceilings can miraculously reassemble themselves. And women, again, find themselves treated as lesser beings, the playthings of men. So I think it's important that we praise famous women, people like Kate Shepherd and Mere Mangakahia, pay homage to their bravery and their leadership. We can't rest on their laurels. Freedom is fragile. It's often assailed by the greedy and the powerful. And this is still the case in New Zealand today. I think that to make lasting gains, we need new cosmologies. The old hierarchical cosmos, which underpins the 1% and the 99%. Men above women and children. Human beings above all other forms of life in the cosmos, and able to exploit and destroy and do whatever they like to rivers. And these things are all interconnected. And I don't think it's working for any of us in today's world. I think we need cosmological models that are based on equality and complementary exchanges drawn both from Te Ao Māori and from the Enlightenment legacies from Europe, because they exist. It's not so hard to find them. Because what price democracy when in our affluent nation, women are still sexually harassed and beaten and abused? Or when those in power from the Law Society downwards turned a blind eye to their suffering? When gross inequality has become entrenched in our intimate, beautiful country, with women and children so often at the very bottom of the heap. I mean, Hannah's statistics tell you that's a lot of what is going on. So like Kate Shepherd and Meremanga Kahia, we have to draw upon our courage and our compassion. This is not about hatred, this is not about even rage, it's about reclaiming our humanity, men and women together. Unless we fight for our rights and for those of our fellows, especially the most vulnerable, they will be lost, because it's happened before in this country and it can easily happen again. We have a proud history of women standing tall in New Zealand. Many women leaders have picked up a paddle and steered the waka to safety. Kia whakatāne au I ahau. They've been the first in the world to seize the vote, among the first to gain degrees, to fight for equal pay, to smash glass ceilings, showing that women can head the country as women, and how glorious to have a Prime Minister who's pregnant, inspiring us in so many different ways. And in that struggle, we as women can stand as women alongside our menfolk. We don't have to mimic them. Lovely though so many of them are in so many ways. So I would just end with a plea. Listen to the cry of Papa Tuanuku, our home, our mother, Papa Tuanuku. Piki mai, kake mai, ho mai te waiora kia hau e tū te hu ana, te moe a te kuia I te pō. Ka pō, kao, kawatea. Climb here, draw near, bring me the water of life. The sleep of this old woman has been troubled in the night, but now the dawn has come, and it's day. It's light. Kia ora, kia ora, kia ora.